Welcome, my friends. Today, I want to share a powerful story from modern history. On February 28, 2026, the world watched shocking news from the Middle East. Warplanes from the United States and Israel launched airstrikes inside Iran. During the attack, Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, was killed. This moment became the peak of a conflict that had lasted for many decades. In only a few hours, an Islamic political era that began after the 1979 revolution seemed to collapse. But this event did not start in one day. Many years ago, the United States and Iran were not enemies. In fact, they were partners, even working together on nuclear technology. So how did friendship turn into hostility? To understand the deep tension between the United States and Iran, we must go back to the early 1950s. At that time, Iran had a popular prime minister named Mohammad Mossadegh. Many people admired him because he believed Iran should control its own natural resources, especially oil. For many years, much of Iran's oil industry was controlled by foreign companies, particularly a British company. Although Iran produced the oil, many citizens felt the country did not receive a fair share of the profits. In 1951, Mossadegh made a bold and historic decision. He announced that Iran would nationalize its oil industry. This meant that the oil would belong to Iran and be managed by the Iranian government. Many Iranians celebrated the decision. They believed their country was finally taking control of its future. However, the British government strongly opposed this move. Britain depended heavily on Iranian oil, and losing control of it was a serious economic and political problem. Tensions between Iran and Britain quickly increased. Britain tried economic pressure and political influence to stop Mossadegh, but these efforts did not succeed. Soon, the situation attracted the attention of the United States. During this time, the world was in the middle of the Cold War, and Western countries were very worried about the spread of communism. Some leaders in Washington feared that political instability in Iran might open the door for Soviet influence. In 1953, the CIA and British intelligence secretly planned an operation to remove Mossadegh from power. This plan became known as Operation Ajax. Through political pressure, propaganda, and support for opposition groups, they helped organize protests and unrest in the country. Eventually, Mossadegh was removed from office. After the coup, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the king of Iran, returned with stronger authority and took full control of the government. For the United States and Britain, the operation seemed like a success. They believed they had protected their interests and kept Iran within the Western sphere of influence. But for many people in Iran, the story looked very different. Many citizens believed their democratic leader had been removed by foreign powers. The event created deep anger and distrust toward Western countries, especially the United States. Although this resentment did not explode immediately, the memory of the coup stayed alive in the minds of many Iranians. After the coup, the relationship between the United States and Iran became much closer. The Shah ruled Iran with strong support from Washington. American leaders saw Iran as an important ally in the Middle East. Because of its location and resources, Iran was considered a key partner for maintaining stability in the region. During the late 1950s and the following decades, the United States invested heavily in Iran. One important example was the Atoms for Peace program. Through this program, the United States helped Iran begin developing nuclear technology for peaceful purposes such as energy and scientific research. American experts assisted Iran in building nuclear facilities and training scientists. At that time, nuclear technology was seen as a symbol of modern progress. The Shah wanted Iran to become a powerful and advanced nation, and nuclear energy seemed like an important step toward that goal. The cooperation between the two countries was not limited to science. The United States also provided Iran with modern weapons, military training, and economic support. With this assistance, the Shah built one of the strongest militaries in the region. American leaders often described Iran as an island of stability in the Middle East. In a region full of conflict and political change, Iran appeared to be a reliable partner. The Shah was expected to act as a kind of guardian of Western interests in the area. For nearly 2 decades, the partnership between Iran and the United States seemed strong and stable. Trade grew, military cooperation increased, and political leaders on both sides believed the alliance would last for a long time. Yet beneath the surface, not everyone in Iran was satisfied. Some people felt the Shah had too much power. Others believed the country was becoming too dependent on foreign influence. These hidden tensions slowly grew over the years. The seeds of anger that were planted in 1953 did not disappear. Instead, they remained quietly in the background, waiting for the moment when they would shape the next dramatic chapter in Iran's history. For many years, Iran appeared to be a strong and stable ally of the United States. Western leaders often described the country as an island of stability in the Middle East. The Shah ruled with great power, and his government worked closely with Washington. Iran had a strong military, a growing economy, and modern technology. From the outside, the country looked successful and secure. However, inside Iran, many people were unhappy. Some believed the Shah ruled like a dictator and did not listen to the voices of ordinary citizens. Political opponents were often arrested, and many people feared the secret police known as Savak. At the same time, rapid modernization created social changes that some religious leaders strongly opposed. They felt the country was moving too far away from traditional Islamic values. Among the strongest critics of the Shah was a religious leader named Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Khomeini spoke openly against the Shah's government and also criticized the strong influence of the United States in Iran. Because of his speeches and growing support, the Shah forced him to leave the country. Khomeini spent many years in exile, first in Iraq and later in France. Even though he was far away, his words continued to reach the Iranian people. His speeches were recorded and secretly shared across the country. Many people listened to them and began to see Khomeini as a symbol of resistance against the Shah. By the late 1970s, protests began to spread across Iran. Students, workers, religious groups, and many ordinary citizens joined the demonstrations. The streets of major cities were filled with people demanding political change. At first, the government tried to control the protests with force, but the demonstrations continued to grow. In 1979, the situation reached a breaking point. The Shah realized he was losing control of the country. Facing massive protests and increasing pressure, he left Iran in January 1979. For many Iranians, This moment marked the end of a long period of royal rule. Shortly after the Shah left, Ayatollah Khomeini returned to Iran. Millions of people welcomed him when he arrived. His return symbolized a new beginning for the country. Soon after, the monarchy officially ended, and Iran became an Islamic republic. This new government was very different from the one before it. Religious leaders gained strong political power, and the country began to follow a system based on Islamic law and principles. The revolution also changed Iran's relationship with the outside world. For the United States, the revolution was a huge shock. For decades, Iran had been one of Washington's closest allies in the Middle East. American leaders had trusted the Shah and believed his government would remain stable. Suddenly, that trusted partner was gone. The new revolutionary government also viewed the United States with deep suspicion. Many Iranian leaders believed America had supported the Shah's rule and helped remove their democratic leader in 1953. Because of this history, they often described the United States as the Great Satan. The tension between the two countries quickly grew stronger. In November 1979, a dramatic event pushed the relationship into a full crisis. A group of Iranian students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. They believed the United States was still interfering in Iran's politics, especially after the Shah was allowed to enter America for medical treatment. The students demanded that the Shah be returned to Iran to face trial. During the attack, they captured 52 American diplomats and staff members inside the embassy. These people became hostages. What followed became one of the most famous crises in modern history. The hostages were held for 444 days. For the American public, it was a painful and humiliating moment. News about the hostages appeared on television every day. At that time, President Jimmy Carter faced enormous pressure to solve the crisis. The United States tried negotiations and diplomatic efforts to secure the hostages' release. There was also a secret rescue mission, but the operation failed after a tragic accident in the desert. As the crisis continued, relations between the two countries completely collapsed. The United States cut diplomatic ties with Iran and froze billions of dollars of Iranian assets. The hostility between the two nations became deeper than ever before. The hostage crisis finally ended in January 1981, when the American hostages were released after long negotiations. But the damage had already been done. Trust between the two countries was almost completely destroyed. The anger and suspicion created during this period would shape their relationship for many decades to come. While the hostage crisis was still continuing, another major event suddenly changed the situation in the Middle East. In September 1980, the leader of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, launched a large military invasion of Iran. He believed that the new Iranian government was weak after the revolution and that Iran's military was disorganized. Saddam hoped he could win a quick victory and gain control of valuable border territories and oil fields. However, the war did not end quickly. Instead, it turned into one of the longest and bloodiest wars of the 20th century. Soldiers from both countries fought along a long and dangerous border. Cities were bombed, oil facilities were attacked, and thousands of young soldiers were sent to the battlefield. For Iran, the war created an urgent problem. The country was already dealing with political change, economic pressure, and international isolation. Now, it also had to defend itself against a powerful invading army. The government needed to focus its energy and resources on the war. At the same time, the hostage crisis with the United States was still damaging Iran's international image and limiting its economic options. Keeping the American hostages did not help Iran during the war. Instead, it made the country even more isolated. Because of this new reality, Iranian leaders slowly began to reconsider their position. They realized that continuing the hostage crisis could make the situation even worse while they were fighting Iraq. After many months of negotiation and diplomatic efforts, a solution finally appeared. In January 1981, Iran agreed to release the 52 American hostages. The decision helped reduce some international pressure and allowed Iran to focus more on the war with Iraq. But the conflict between Iran and Iraq continued for many years. The war lasted until 1988, causing enormous destruction in both countries. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians were killed, and many cities were damaged or destroyed. During the war, the United States did not support Iran. Instead, Washington quietly provided intelligence and strategic information to Iraq. American leaders believed that limiting Iran's power was important for maintaining balance in the region. For many Iranians, this action confirmed their suspicion that the United States was still working against them. The memories of the 1953 coup, the revolution, and the hostage crisis were now joined by another painful chapter. Even after the Iran-Iraq War ended, the relationship between the United States and Iran remained tense. In the late 1980s, another tragic event made the situation worse. In 1988, a U.S. Navy warship mistakenly shot down Iran Air Flight 655, a civilian airplane. All 290 people on board were killed. The incident shocked the world and caused deep anger in Iran. Although the United States later expressed regret, many Iranians saw the event as another example of hostility. During the 1990s, tensions continued through naval encounters in the Persian Gulf and ongoing political disagreements. The United States also began to impose stronger economic sanctions on Iran. These sanctions limited trade, investment, and financial connections with the global economy. The situation became even more serious in 2002. In a famous speech, U.S. President George W. Bush described Iran as part of the axis of evil. This term referred to countries that the United States believed supported terrorism and threatened global security. At the same time, international investigators revealed that Iran had several secret nuclear facilities. Western governments feared that Iran might be developing nuclear weapons, even though Iran insisted its program was peaceful. Because of these concerns, the United States and its allies increased economic pressure on Iran. New sanctions targeted banks, oil exports, and international trade. Over time, these measures pushed Iran into deep financial isolation. For ordinary Iranian citizens, the sanctions created serious economic problems. Prices increased, jobs became harder to find, and many businesses struggled to survive. By the early 2000s, the long conflict between Iran and the United States had become one of the most complicated and dangerous rivalries in modern international politics. The next chapter of the story would involve diplomacy, negotiations, and a brief moment of hope for peace. By the early 2000s, the tension between Iran and the United States had lasted for many years. Economic sanctions were hurting Iran's economy, and many countries were worried about Iran's nuclear program. Western leaders feared that Iran might try to build nuclear weapons. Iran, however, continued to say that its nuclear program was only for peaceful purposes, such as energy and scientific research. Because of these growing concerns, several countries began serious diplomatic negotiations with Iran. The talks included the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Russia, China, and Germany. For many months, diplomats met again and again, trying to find a solution that could reduce tensions and prevent a nuclear crisis. Finally, in 2015, an important agreement was reached. This agreement was called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA. The deal was signed during the presidency of Barack Obama. Under this agreement, Iran accepted strict limits on its nuclear program. The country agreed to reduce the amount of uranium it enriched and to allow international inspectors to monitor its nuclear facilities. These inspections were meant to ensure that Iran could not secretly build nuclear weapons. In return, the United States and other countries agreed to remove many economic sanctions that had been placed on Iran. Iranian banks could reconnect to the global financial system, and the country could sell more oil to international markets. For a moment, the agreement created hope around the world. Many people believed that this deal could open a new chapter in the relationship between Iran and Western countries. Some even hoped that decades of hostility between Iran and the United States might slowly come to an end. Inside Iran, some citizens welcomed the agreement because they believed it would improve the economy. Businesses expected new investments, and people hoped that trade with other countries would grow again. However, the agreement also had many critics. Some political leaders in the United States argued that the deal was not strong enough. They believed Iran might still find ways to continue its nuclear ambitions in the future. In Iran, some hardline groups also distrusted the United States and worried that Washington might not keep its promises. Because of these disagreements, the future of the agreement was always uncertain. In 2018, the situation changed dramatically. President Donald Trump announced that the United States would withdraw from the JCPOA. He argued that the deal was flawed and did not fully prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons in the long term. After leaving the agreement, the United States launched a new strategy known as the Maximum Pressure Campaign. Washington reintroduced heavy economic sanctions and added even more restrictions. These measures targeted Iran's oil industry, banks, and many international business connections. The goal of this policy was to force Iran to accept a new and stricter agreement. However, the strategy also increased tensions between the two countries. Iran's economy began to suffer once again as sanctions returned. Oil exports fell sharply, and the national currency lost much of its value. Many Iranian citizens faced rising prices and economic uncertainty. The situation became even more dangerous in January 2020. In a dramatic and controversial decision, the United States carried out a drone strike near Baghdad International Airport in Iraq. The attack killed General Qasem Soleimani, one of the most powerful military leaders in Iran. Soleimani was the commander of Iran's Quds force and was considered a national hero by many supporters in Iran. The United States accused him of organizing attacks against American forces and allies in the Middle East. His death shocked the region and quickly raised fears of a much larger war. Millions of people attended funeral ceremonies in Iran, and the Iranian government promised revenge. For several days, the world watched nervously as tensions reached one of their highest levels in decades. Many experts believed that the United States and Iran were standing on the edge of a full-scale war. Although a direct war did not begin at that moment, the trust between the two countries was once again severely damaged. The brief hope created by the nuclear agreement only a few years earlier now seemed very distant. By the middle of the 2020s, the relationship between the United States and Iran had once again become extremely tense. Years of sanctions, political conflict, and military incidents had created deep mistrust between the two nations. Many diplomatic efforts had failed, and both sides continued to accuse each other of dangerous actions. In 2025, Donald Trump returned to the White House as President of the United States. Soon after taking office, his administration announced a new and very strong policy toward Iran. American leaders argued that Iran's nuclear activities and regional influence were still serious threats to international security. The new administration demanded that Iran accept a much stricter nuclear agreement than the previous JCPOA. This new proposal required Iran to completely stop certain nuclear activities, limit missile development, and reduce its influence in several Middle Eastern conflicts. To push Iran toward accepting these demands, President Trump gave the Iranian government a clear 60-day deadline. During this period, diplomats from different countries attempted to restart negotiations. Some international leaders hoped that a compromise might still be possible. However, the discussions quickly reached a deadlock. Iranian leaders rejected the new conditions, arguing that they were unfair and violated Iran's sovereignty. They also insisted that the United States had already broken trust by leaving the earlier nuclear agreement in 2018. As the deadline approached, tension in the region continued to grow. Military forces in the Persian Gulf increased their presence, and many observers feared that a direct confrontation could be coming. When the negotiations finally collapsed, the United States launched a military operation known as Operation Midnight Hammer. The operation focused on Iran's nuclear facilities, which American intelligence believed were deeply protected underground. During the mission, U.S. forces used bunker-busting bombs, powerful weapons designed to destroy targets hidden deep beneath the earth. These bombs were aimed at several nuclear research and enrichment sites across Iran. The attacks caused major damage to important nuclear infrastructure. American officials claimed the operation was necessary to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. However, Iranian leaders strongly condemned the strikes and described them as an act of aggression. The airstrikes shocked the world and immediately increased fears of a wider war. Many governments called for calm, but the situation was already moving toward a much larger conflict. Inside Iran, the country was already facing serious internal problems. Years of economic sanctions had weakened the economy. The national currency had lost much of its value, and many people struggled with rising prices and unemployment. At the same time, protests had begun to appear in several cities. Some citizens were frustrated with economic hardship and political restrictions. These internal pressures made the situation even more unstable. In February 2026, the crisis finally exploded into a large-scale military confrontation. A new wave of airstrikes and military operations spread across important strategic locations. Several powerful figures in Iran's leadership structure became targets of these attacks. During this period of intense conflict, the death of key Iranian leaders shocked the nation and the world. Among them was the country's supreme leader, whose authority had symbolized the political system created after the 1979 Islamic Revolution. For many observers, this moment marked the dramatic collapse of a political era that had lasted for nearly half a century. The government structure that had been built after the revolution now faced one of the greatest challenges in its history. The conflict of 2026 did not appear suddenly. It was the result of decades of mistrust, political decisions, and historical events that slowly pushed two former partners toward open confrontation. The long story between the United States and Iran leaves an important lesson for the world. It shows how foreign intervention can create consequences that last for many generations. The events that began in 1953 planted seeds of anger and mistrust that continued to grow for decades. Throughout the years, both countries had moments when peace seemed possible. Agreements like the JCPOA gave hope that diplomacy could replace conflict. However, deep suspicion on both sides made lasting trust very difficult. As tensions continued, ordinary people paid the highest price. Economic sanctions, war, and political instability caused suffering for millions of civilians who had little control over these decisions. Today, this long history reminds us that political actions can shape the future of nations for many years. It also shows that without trust and understanding, even the strongest diplomatic efforts can fail, leaving a lasting impact on global security and international relations.